In the beginning, we started with a question from Emma as
Yeah.
a rising ninth grader. And your advice for her was to draw, 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 right? Just work on the craft. How much should a growing artist in animation or another field be giving to also building, say, personal resilience and coping skills and developing their gifts that are outside of the actual arts, communication skills, interpersonal skills?
Yeah.
How important is that for an artist?
I mean, it's huge. It really is. It's and in any industry, it should be a real paramount factor in being a good employee and working well with others. But it's something that's not discussed enough, I think, in the creative arts, because we tend to think of creativity as a singular thing too much. Pixar is a good example of a company and a studio that's kind of taken back the veil on that a little bit, and they talk about their creative team and they call it their brain trust, right? Which is a group of artists that really set the direction of Pixar films early on. But for years, it was always at Disney anyway, a real singular thing. It was Walt. There was like one guy that was the main leader, and everybody else just kind of felt like cogs in the wheel of Walt's bigger ideas. But that I can't say enough for how animation is developed and how we as artists develop, that you need to be able to work with others well, because animation is a team sport. It really is. It's on any one given animated film I've done at Disney feature animation, there's been anywhere from 300 to 450 people working on it. And you intersect with a lot of different departments and people, whether it be production or creative people, on a day in, day out basis. Even if you're working from home, you have to have those kind of skill sets like we are right now because of COVID. There's always times where you really need to feel like you're connecting with people and you're expressing your goals, you're expressing your creativity, and then you're also taking in content and understanding from others too of what they want.
And maybe even more so as a director, would you think? Because
Oh
you're this
yeah.
common thread through all the departments.
Well, and you referenced my book earlier. I appreciate that. But yeah, I wrote that book. It's called Directing for Animation. And the subtitle of it is Everything You Didn't Learn in Art School. And I added that subtitle to it because I wanted people to know that the core of the book, which it really is a philosophy of we need to know how to be creative managers also. And particularly as a director, we are creative managers. We're management. We work for a studio. We have, yes, we're trying to spearhead this project. In the case of Disney, an animated feature. In my case, it was Mulan. And but we also have to know how to work with teams, departments, and all that within the production pipeline, and be responsible to a budget, a larger economic and financial structure. All of those things matter when you get into directing, whereas underneath that, it doesn't matter as much, and you have a lot more individual freedoms creatively. But once you're a director on a film, things change big time, and you got to know how to work with people.
As a director, do you kind of feel like almost like middle management? Because you have these senior managers over you with their expectations, and you have people working under you, no disrespect intended, that need to answer to you. And you've got to walk this fine line between all the expectations and what's reality, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's kind of like upper middle management, if you will, because it is the highest. Being a director at Disney is probably the highest creative position you can have, and after that is management positions that have more financial pull to them. But it is the highest creative position that you can have at Disney. That and the producer, which is kind of in tandem to a certain degree. So yeah, it's a different kind of, it's a big jump from, I was a supervising animator on Lion King, went on to Hunchback of Notre Dame, started supervising the gargoyle characters, these funny three characters, and then was asked to become director of Mulan. There was no in between. That was one jump, and it was probably the biggest jump, certainly the biggest jump in my career, position-wise. And I had no idea. There was no training for it. There was no school to go to. They didn't have me shadow any other directors. It was amazing how much they just said, okay, go.
Wow. So what what were your expectations going into it? And then what actually happened?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fears and doubts, but thankfully, my mother was a very strong and positive influence on me as a child, and she always had this like attitude of, and she really sewed this into us as kids, that what's the worst thing can happen? Somebody could say no, right? So always ask the question. So one thing I learned is I need to ask questions, but I did have this feeling of, I got to kind of have this image that I know what I'm doing and that I can handle this. And what I discovered was that went out the door pretty quickly, that I just didn't. There was so much that I was unprepared for, that I never had expectations of. So there was just so much that I could not anticipate, that I just had to blindly walk through that door of opportunity and just hope for the best and
Yeah.
hold on for dear life.
That's really a biblical principle, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
in First Timothy, I think it is where the writer says, "Don't let anyone disrespect you because of your youth." You came in as this young co-director in your mid-late 20s with no experience, and you were expected to manage a team, some of whom you worked for a year before, 2 years before.
Yeah. It was. I was the youngest director when they asked me to direct on Mulan in probably Disney history. I think I was 27 when I first started on it. In charge of an over $100 million film. I never quite knew what the final budget was, but and in charge of like 450 people on two different studios, two different coasts, out here in Southern California and one in Orlando, Florida. And I had no way of gauging that, no way of preparing for that, and no way of expecting what the outcome would be. I only knew that the one thing that I did have from my mom, like I was saying earlier, is that she did train me well to kind of go, okay, you just got to take one step at a time, and know that I knew that as a Christian, I knew that God was with me and that He had given me this opportunity. I did not feel like I earned it or deserved it. So I did feel like it was something that God bestowed upon me, and I was just going to kind of ride that Bronco horse as long as I could. That was my feeling about it.
Yeah, yeah. Was there ever a point during Mulan in particular where you had enough self-doubt where you thought, I might not be able to finish this? They may have to replace me. I'm just floundering.
I never wanted to be replaced, but there was a point where I thought I might be replaced for sure. There was a lot of scrutiny on me at a certain point through mid-production on Mulan, where my co-director and I were not seeing things eye to eye, and we were not getting along, and it was starting to inhibit the film's progress. It was not good, and I saw it, he saw it, our producer saw it, and we tried to address it individually. I always kind of thought, well, he's the one that should change, because I felt confident about being right about what I was pursuing and pushing as my agendas, but he felt the same way. He felt like I needed to back off and let him have his way. And it is one of the most difficult things about being a director at Disney. Oftentimes there's two, and you co-direct because it's such a large team, like I said, 400 people, 450, that you have to kind of separate and put out fires and be creative individually, and then come together on the important things like story and editorial and things, and recording voices and some other things like that. But we'd separate into different departments and then come together on main things. But that relationship and knowing how to manage him when we didn't really know each other too well, we were put together for the first time as a team on this film. So not only was I promoted to a first-time director, but I was placed with somebody that I didn't pick, that the studio picked for me as a co-director. And we had to somehow work out that we had the same vision and wanted to go in the same direction on this movie. And that just complicated everything exponentially for me. Thankfully, he was a Christian also, and we saw eye to eye on a lot of content things and spiritual elements and And that really benefited, I think, Mulan in a really big way, because it could have gone a lot of different ways story-wise. So he and I seeing eye to eye spiritually was a big thing. But then on top of it, it helped us to start to realize we needed to work together, and we needed to be a team, and we needed to see things eye to eye. We needed to communicate better. And so I went from a point where I thought I might be fired. He thought he might be fired. I'm sure those points where we both thought we would be fired, to all of a sudden we started working together and things changed in a positive way.
Wow, when I was reading your book, I found myself taking notes on the side of all the words you were coming up with, the words you were using to describe the different roles a director has to play at different points.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You talk about a coach, a cheerleader, a politician, a negotiator, diplomat, parent, salesman, executive, servant, leader, friend, psychotherapist, and counselor. That really caught my attention. Boss, captain. Wow. That is a lot of hats to wear. Which of those do you think is a strength for you? And which one was maybe your biggest challenge?
I think, I think God has always given me a strong element of connecting with people emotionally. So I do think that I was able to connect with people and relate with them where they're at, and hear their problems and hear their issues and understand it from an emotional standpoint. I was raised primarily by a single mother, so I think that really benefited me in that I could connect with people emotionally maybe better than other males that were around me, and certainly my co-director who was not strong at that. And he would admit that too. But I did really try and understand where people were coming from emotionally first, and then work through elements of schedule and commitments and expectations and things like that. But trying to understand where they came from emotionally first.
Would you say, is it fair to say then that a character trait or a quality of empathy has been
Yeah.
really essential to your leadership success?
Yeah, and I think some of that was definitely born out of, I was young and I was trying to find my way too, so I could really connect with others that were in roles, even though they were underneath me in many respects on this creative ladder. I had a real empathy for where they were at, because I had either just been there or had risen up above that and knew the struggles, so I had been there before usually. And so I could have this empathy and understanding of what they were going through, and their pressures and stuff. And while, and I don't know, that is something that my mom always instilled in me too, is to kind of walk around in other people's shoes and really see things through their eyes, and not always think about yourself and your own feelings about things, but really trying to understand where they're coming from. And that was something that I always tried to do.
Yeah.